The first thing I did was actually take a postdoc because I was unsure about my personal feelings about academia versus industry. And I knew that at least for computer science, it's reasonable to take a postdoc for a year or two. And if you really don't like it and decide like industry is definitely a better option, then you can typically get a much higher starting package because you are not a fresh PhD student anymore. You're somebody who's then gone on to do this postdoc in like a separate lab, developing bigger professional connections. Um, and then if you do decide to stay and go into academia, you now have, several more letter writers, at least the PI that you postdoc for, and potentially even more than that. So that can go a long way in like upward trajectory for the career, whether it's in industry or academia. So I did that. I liked it. I decided that academia was probably good for me, but I still wanted some industry experience. So I'm in some senses doing a second postdoc now at Amazon with this visiting academic position, which is a year stint to basically get to work directly with industry scientists and industry engineers on projects that I think are interesting from a research perspective. So it's this really nice marriage of sort of the science experience that I have both as a graduate student and then as a postdoc, more, semi-running a lab, now working with industry scientists to try to bring some of that modern research vision into the work that they're doing there at Amazon. The best advice I received was actually from my PI as a PhD student, which was to do internships. He said, from his perspective, telling students that they should be in academia is a mistake because it's not for everybody. In fact, it's not for the majority of PhD students, at least in CS. And so doing industry internships can give an opportunity to see like a little bit of what it's going to be like when the PhD is over. And if you really like that, then there's no contest. And if you're more like me and kind of feel on the fence, then you can extend that career out a little bit further. But definitely the most actionable, solid advice I got about career was to, during the PhD program, experience what it's like to not be in the PhD program by doing internships and sort of diversifying the lived experience. That way you're not spending, 5 or 6 years doing exactly the same thing, because that can really narrow your perspective about what's possible. And the postdoc is a sort of obvious answer, which is, take some time to see if you actually want to be in academia or industry. But to actually land the position, you have to know people who want to hire you for the position. And for that, the advice for both academia and industry is get really good at aggressively networking. And it can be really uncomfortable to cold email a bunch of people before a conference and be like, hey, I exist and I would like to talk to you, so that you know that I exist. But it's necessary, both for the academic job market and I think for getting a solid industry position, to build those relationships and make sure that people know your name as well as your work, and putting a name to that work and making sure the work is in their sort of purview is necessary to get the initial offers in place in the first place. So networking goes a long way, whether we want it to or not. Nepotism is still sort of rampant in these industries, and that can be extended just to acquaintances. So we should take advantage of it. As an early career PhD student, I relied almost entirely on senior PhD students and occasionally my PI to make these connections for me at conferences. So shadowing, basically. Find somebody whose work you already like, who's in your lab, who won't mind if you're tagging along with them, and just meet everybody they know. That gives you a natural in, too, because the people they know are already their friends or their allies, which means they're likely to sort of take you into the fold as well. And then as you become more senior, you have sort of the clout necessary to do cold calling. So for postdoc, for academic jobs, and then for this visiting academic position I have at Amazon, I explored different industry options. For all of those, I just cold emailed people. And again, that can be really uncomfortable because it's you're really putting yourself out there to getting ghosted or somebody telling you leave me alone. But everybody's actually nice. Academia, at least in CS, is not quite as mean as I imagined it would be. So just cold emailing a bunch of people who might know you or that you might have met over the last 5 years and being like, hey, we met once and I know you don't remember that, but it was important to me and I'm looking for X, where X is the next position that you're actually interested in doing. And I'd say while I didn't end up going and working for Google Research, one of the positions I strongly considered as an alternative to this Amazon position was at Google. And the manager I would have worked with is somebody that I knew from networking in academia. He had left academia to start this research lab, and that connection had remained for me. So even if it's a connection that feels like it's being made purely for academia's sake, these things shift a lot. And like if that person ends up in industry later, it can help whether you're in industry or not, because they're either free grant money or free networking inside of a company in case you want to switch jobs. I'd say it began to affect my decisions all the way back to choosing a PI. When I was looking at graduate schools, I found out, not from a PI directly, but from sort of students who worked in the lab, how that PI handled first generation students and sort of what that PI's pedigree was, so to speak. A lot of professors are the children of professors, or the children of doctors and sort of other professionals. And a lot of grad students are too. And so it can be difficult to sort of tease this out, but some groups are more open than others. I found out that my PI was also a first generation academic, the one that I ended up picking. That meant a lot to me. It was important to me to feel like I wasn't asking stupid questions. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't feel like you're asking stupid questions anyway, but at least they're questions that that person probably also asked. So that mattered. And then as I've moved up through the career and started, moving into positions of power as a postdoc, and then next year as an actual starting professor, I've been trying to do more in the outreach sect of things. So identifying first generation students, making it clear that like it's okay to ask questions that other people might think you should already know the answers to. And that's not as helpful for people who are currently in PhD programs, but know that like you do have allies. And some of these organizations like First Gen Docs on Twitter exist and are helpful like across disciplines for sort of getting people who are all living the same first time experience together to say, I have questions and my family can't answer them. I look for somebody who has the engineering chops to follow through on their ideas. So you need somebody who is not just a scientist, like not just a visionary, but someone who's also willing to get their hands dirty, quote unquote, and actually do some of the grunt work and the engineering work to make these things happen. I think this is generally true across industry, but it's definitely something that I would look for, having worked with other postdocs, for example, in a recent position, and finding out that like some people let it slip. They lose their sort of technical charm and become more ideas people, and ideas people are not as valuable when you're on a team that's actually trying to get something done. To other queer students, I'd say look for organizations within your field, especially if they exist, to find scholars who are like-minded, either in the same boat as you or at least allies. In computer science, we have the Queer and AI organization that has a big presence on social media and also does really nice things like sponsoring registration fees and things for queer students at some conferences, as well as having internal workshops at the conferences for people to sort of come together in a no recording, no judgment space and like be like, we exist here at the same time. And in something like computer science that's not historically been particularly friendly to underrepresented groups and queer folks, it's really nice to see those organizations like taking root and becoming a mainstream in the AI community.